thank you all for joining us today, and apologies if there was confusion over the start time. That was entirely my fault. Mixture of given slightly different time in the calendar and email, so I apologize for that. But it's nice to see so many of you here, and looking through the faces, first time on this call for a lot of you, which is fantastic, because one of the things that we're aiming to do in the next phase of this project work is to get more people involved. So we're off to a flying start. What I normally do for these calls is have a few slides to help guide us through some of the discussion. So I'm going to fire those off in a second. You won't just be hearing from me today. So Sally is also going to be helping me step through some of this presentation. So she's going to give an update on some of the work that she's been doing. We're going to try and keep to time, and also make sure that we give a bit of time for discussion. Feel free to ask questions as we go, but I'll also leave a bit of time at the end for anything else that you want to raise, or any questions that you haven't had a chance to ask. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so so this is the first of what I've been jokingly calling season 2 of the OpenActive standards work. This is in this first call, I wanted to discuss some of the plans and priorities for phase 2 from the perspective of the standards, tools and technology aspects of the program. We're going to talk a bit about some of the research that we've started to get underway around improving discoverability and usability of the data that has been published so far, and have a discussion about what's coming up in terms of the roadmap, how we can continue to grow this community, and as I say, hopefully have a bit of a discussion and get some feedback from you on where you think we should be focusing some of our time and efforts. Hopefully you all saw the recent announcement of the continuation of the OpenActive program as a whole. We've also been publishing a few blog posts over the last week or so about the standards and tools track specifically. We have several things that we've been tasked to do as part of phase 2. We need to continue to revise and improve the specifications that we've built so far. So the paging specification and the opportunity data model. So we're expecting to invest some time on that over the next few months based on feedback that we get from users. But one of the key things that we need to focus on is how do we go about improving the discoverability and usability of both the data and the standards. And that's a piece of work that we've actually already got underway, and Sally's going to share some of her initial thinking there, and we'd like to get some more input from the group. The other thing that we will be doing is trying to move forward with the activity list. We made some progress on that in phase 1, but it's still a long way from being completed. So we wanted to share some thoughts about how we might be able to kind of get that back on track. And really the kind of new area that we'll be focusing on in terms of developing guidance and standards is on looking at booking. So how do we build on the open data to support booking workflows and let people actually do more than just discover opportunities to be active, but actually participate and take part in those events. So what we've been thinking about at the ODI is about the broader network, the ecosystem that we're building as part of OpenActive, and how the standards, tools, and technologies that we're creating in this group can help move that forward. So here's a deliberately terrible sketch for me, just highlighting a few of the publishers and intermediaries and data users that are already starting to work with the data. So we have publishers like Fusion, British Cycling, who are providing data that's being used by IMIN in their role as an intermediary. And we also have interest from people like the BBC in starting to incorporate that data to create activity finders. Get Active London have been using the data via IMIN to power their activity finder. So we're already starting to see some benefits to end users in terms of being able to more easily discover opportunities to be active. So we have data flowing through the system already. When we start to move forward with our booking work, then there will be other types of value exchange. So money and payment, revenue shares around booking. So we want to kind of enable a rich, diverse ecosystem that is as open as possible for as many people to get involved. But the emphasis on phase one was on really about publishing data. But now that we have this broader ecosystem, we need to start to think about users of the data as well, and how we can best support them. And that's going to be a key theme, I think, of what we're going to be doing in phase two. So we've been looking a bit at this idea of developer relations. So how you start to support developers who are using an API or a platform or are participating in the kind of ecosystem that we're building in OpenActive. This is quite nice hierarchy of developer needs that I came across recently, which I think usefully ties together some of the work that we're doing as part of this work stream, but also more broadly across OpenActive. So at a basic level, developers need good documentation that will help them find and use data. Need to be a good onboarding process that helps developers discover the data and start to become productive with it. And then stacked on top of that is a variety of different types of support. So community support through the forums that we've been creating on Slack, on Twitter and elsewhere, but also educational resources, so tutorials, and other forms of documentation. So we're starting to think about how we start to build these out across the program. So I'm going to pass over to Sally.
You can stay doing the slides if you want. That's
yeah, I'll keep the slides up, and if you just shout when you want to move on.
Lovely. Okay, so if you do jump to the next slide, as that very nicely introduces, we have been looking at discoverability and usability, but I just wanted to really quickly summarize that. So this sort of funnel that you can see on the screen is very much what we're looking at in terms of people's kind of relationship journey with OpenActive. So there are people who are completely unaware, don't have a clue that it exists, or that they might even find it relevant. There are people who are sort of starting to become aware but aren't really doing anything. Then there are people who are taking action in various different forms. And then there are the people who have already done stuff, but they have this sort of potentially ongoing relationship. So what we want to do is we want to kind of, it sounds really horrible and like conversion-y, but we want people to kind of obviously go through that funnel and bring other people along the way as well. So to do that, we want to make it easier, one, for people to find out about OpenActive, but specifically to find out more about the data itself. And also to think about how we make that data much, much easier to use, because as Lee said, we haven't really focused on that to date, and it's been more about getting people out there, publishing data. But we want it to start being about people using that as well. So if you just want to jump to the next one. But a little summary, I'm going to fly through the rest of this because I don't want it to be about me talking at you the whole time. But what we want to think about are these kind of different areas. So how do people find the data? Those kind of questions. So where should we be visible and who to? And then also, how can we support people better using the data? So to do that, we've been posing all of these kind of questions about what the problems are, what the gaps are, what we could be doing better, and trying to think in a little bit more detail about what's actually happening. So if you go through again, This happily ties into the fact that we are redoing the website. So there's a couple of blog posts there, one being talking a little bit about the website discovery work that we've done, and one being the fact that the tender is open. So if you know anybody in these areas who wants to contribute thoughts or maybe wants to apply, please do share, because there are a lot of crossovers. And what we found is that it's kind of like that Venn diagram there, where you're going to have website content which is quite general, so which is about OpenActive perhaps, but actually that helps to inform people about what we're doing and why it's relevant. And then you've also got other things that aid in discoverability and usability that aren't part of the website. So the comms, for instance, is a big piece of it. But in the middle, we've got a really nice little bit of overlap. So if you want to jump ahead again. What we've done is kind of merge the two a little bit. So we've done all of these things, which spans from looking at website analytics on the current site through to kind of holding some workshops where we've been mapping out some end-to-end processes at people's touch points all along their way, both online and offline. We've been doing a lot of things like interviewing people. So if anybody out there wants to be interviewed, it's not painful at all, I promise. It's just really informal chat. So that's either people on the call or anybody listening afterwards. You're very welcome to get in touch. And we've also been doing a load of surveys. So outside of that, been doing a load of desk research and stuff as well, which you can read this at your leisure afterwards. But if we jump ahead again, I've got a few examples. So desk research wise, we've been looking at a load of developer documentation. So this is just the Facebook developer site as an example, but looking at things like the information architecture, so how they're structuring their sites, how things are being categorized, the kind of terminology that's being used, basically to look at what we should be doing better. And on the next slide, you'll see that we've also been looking at UI examples. So what really nice examples of things do we have that, again, we can learn from? So on the left, I really liked the fact that we've got this kind of set up your integration, 3 simple steps, code snippets, different languages as well in there. We've got at the top the build new experiences with applets example, gives some really nice use cases and can help people relate to it quickly. At the bottom, we've got really good signposting, which I think is lacking a little bit at the moment. And then there's also one that I can't see very well because everybody's faces are in the way, but it's something, it's basically like a 3-step process of making it very clear what actually has to happen. So there's a lot of things I think we can learn from. And on the next slide, we've also been looking at content as well. So we have the spec, which is brilliant, and Lee's worked incredibly hard on that. But unless you're the kind of person who enjoys reading big spec docs, then that might not be the most appealing thing to you. So what we want to do is start thinking a lot more about how we can do things like quick start guides, how the language that we're using can be quite inclusive, how we can give examples to guide people through this process better, and generally kind of flesh out this world of holding people's hands, but also answering their questions, really. And another thing to mention just before we sort of come back to that a little bit is on the next slide, which is tools as well. So as I think a lot of you will probably be familiar with, if you start to look into developer sites and things like that, you're very often provided with tools to play around with data. This is a GitHub example, but there are lots of things that we could potentially be doing better on that front. There are some important points, which I think we're going to come back to in a second, in terms of responsibilities and division and actually how much we can actually do in terms of resources and timing and all of that. But just in terms of the content that we're looking at, on the next slide, you'll see Lee found this really nice, basically kind of a categorization of it. So I don't know if you want to kind of talk through that in more detail, Lee?
Yeah, sure. So this was a breakdown of the different types of documentation that is often useful to help developers, but also people more broadly with get up to speed with a new subject. So there are tutorials, how-to guidance, discussions, and reference material. So to put that in the context for OpenActive, what we've created so far in terms of the specifications is really just reference material. It's the kind of detailed guidance which you need to kind of underpin all of the others, but is not necessarily the most accessible way for somebody to get to grips with being able to quickly work out how to publish their data according to the standards, or to map their internal data model to the standard that we've described. So we need to supplement that with tutorials. So, being able to quickly take through somebody the step of publishing their first opportunity data, or reading from the paging API to collect and index data from elsewhere. In terms of how-to guidance, this is more goal-oriented, so it's more kind of problems. So problem solving. So think a good context here is think about Stack Overflow. I've got a specific problem. How do I address that? And again, that's something a gap that we need to fill. The kind of discussion material is much more general. So it would be more just kind of background to why we've approached designing the standards in a particular way, or what we hope to achieve by standardizing particular aspects of the ecosystem. So we're planning to put together some of this guidance. So we'll have some resource at the ODI to do that. And we hope to start releasing some of that over the coming months. And it would be great to get your feedback on this. So if you have previously struggled to get started, we'd like to hear about what problems you've faced, so that we can think about whether we're creating the right kind of documentation. But also, as we produce some of these tutorials and how-to guidance, it'd be useful to get some feedback from you on how well you think it works, so we can make sure that we're supporting the community in the right ways. I'm going to carry on and talk a little bit about developer tools, just to kind of build on what Sally was just saying. There's a variety of different types of tools that are useful for developers. At one end, I think you have what I've been thinking of in terms of onboarding and discovery tools. So how do you find the data? How do you know what is included in an opportunity data feed from a particular publisher? So how do you know what activities are in there, what the regional focus is, etc. Through to much more kind of detailed, lower level tools that might help with kind of be more productive. So client libraries, validators, and other plugins that make it easy to use opportunity data in particular programming environments or frameworks or products. But we also think that there's some broader enabling tools that will help support the ecosystem. So, for example, every user of opportunity data is likely to be doing some kind of aggregation of the data. So is there some open source tooling that can help support those? But what we're going to focus on to begin with is the onboarding and discovery tools. So things like a dashboard for the APIs. A reference we've been using quite a bit because we were involved in some of the early work here is what's been put together as part of the Open Banking project. So if you go to the Open Banking website, you can see on one page all of the APIs that have been published by UK banks. You can see whether they've implemented, which APIs they've implemented, which version of the API that they're conformant with, etc. So what we want to do is to start to put this in place for OpenActive. So we can highlight how do you get to the endpoint for specific publishers. Is that endpoint conformant with the paging spec? Is it following the data model? What types of activities are in there? What kind of regional focus is in there, et cetera, et cetera. So as a developer, you can quickly jump into the data, find and jump into the data that you need.
And again, this is where you or anybody you know comes in terms of we're going to get started on that, because with all of this, we're very keen for it not to turn into these massive kind of behemoth things that never actually get finished. So we're very much the mindset that we'll put stuff out and we'll iterate on it. So that will carry on anyway. The stuff that I'm doing in terms of interviewing people, doing research will feed into that. So we've already heard some things in terms of preferences around how people search, or the kind of data attributes that are actually the most interesting to them and how they want to pick out the bits that they actually care about. But if you have any preferences, then again, please do let us know. This is your kind of channel to feed in. And on top of that, we have a blog post out there at the moment, which is broadly about what I've been doing to an extent. And at the bottom of that, because Medium is so beautiful and streamlined that it doesn't let you shout about things very easily, we have a survey. So that is the survey, and that is the blog post. So if you'd be so kind as to share those two, please send us your thoughts. That kind of covers a whole range of things, but as we sort of say, if you just find it easier to jump on the phone or send us an email, then you're totally welcome to do that as well. So yeah, if you could help, that would be fantastic.
Okay, before we move on and talk about activity list and booking, has anybody got any other comments or thoughts they want to share on what we've just discussed there? Does it seem reasonable focus for this stage of the project? Seeing nodding. I'm not hearing anything, but I'm seeing nodding, so I'm taking that as a...
Yeah, I think it looks really good.
Sentiment analysis is positive, so yeah, let's go with that.
Okay. Let me resume share everything. Right, so that's the discovery and usability work. In terms of revising the opportunity data model, the way I want to kind of drive that in future is to do it based on feedback from people who are actually starting to use the data. So we know that there's quite a deal of flexibility in the model. We may need to start tightening that up to make it easier for consumers. There are refinements that we could make to the model. There might be other detail that we need to add to make it useful for people. But rather than just kind of forge ahead on kind of guessing what might be useful or what we should prioritize, I'm really keen to hear from people who are actually starting to use the data. So if you are building things against the opportunity data, then let us know what's working or what's not working. If you know people who are, then please ask them to share with this group as well. But thinking about the other areas of activity, so firstly the activity list. So we made some progress on that last year. We've got it was really encouraging that so many different organizations started to share their lists with the group so that we could start to look for commonalities. And we managed to make some progress in merging together some lists from Sport England, from Sport Suite, and from Movement and Dance. But I don't think anyone has totally bought into the structure of the list as it stands. I think there's been some differing opinions about how we structure the list in terms of how hierarchical it should be. Some different opinions about how we go about making the list be useful. So should we aim for it to cover as much as possible, or should we just be focusing on some kind of subset of activities? So I don't really feel like we've got to a good set of agreement on that early draft. So while it's there and people have started to link their activities, their own activity lists against it, it still needs an awful lot of work to move it forward. So I think one of the things that we've been struggling with is just to get that, is to get agreement by only doing it largely through these calls. So I'm thinking that we might need to actually run some face-to-face workshops for those people who are particularly keen on moving this aspect of our work forward. I think that there's a lot of merit in getting all of us together in a room to hash out what that structure looked like. There's some considerations that we've not really dug into yet, which is about how the list is owned and maintained moving forward. Because it's changing quite rapidly, or could be changing quite rapidly, we need to work out what's the mechanism for taking on suggestions and incorporating those into the list. And also doing some user testing. So is the list actually useful? Is it fit for purpose? So while I don't think the lack of a common list is stopping anybody from publishing opportunity data, we're not yet at a stage where I feel that the list is something that we could strongly recommend. At the moment, it feels like something that people can be testing and evaluating, but it's not really where we want it to be. So I want to focus one of our next calls around the list and looking at some of the structure, but I will also be trying to organise some workshops. So I'd be interested to know if anyone here on the call is particularly keen to get involved in that, so that we can try and move that forward.
Cool. Yeah, I'd be keen to have involvement in a face-to-face workshop at some point.
Yeah. Okay, great. Anybody else? It's okay.
Yeah, highly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we'd be interested as well.
Great. Okay. So I think. Sorry.
Sorry, all I was going to say is that a face-to-face workshop, sounds good, for us to move it forward, because I am not sure how much time I would be able to spend on it over a long period of time, but certainly face-to-face workshops, would be something that could be scheduled and handled it that way.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I think if we can get to a point of having some common agreement around the structure of the list and how we go about governing the contents, then that will give us a framework that we can then use to move it forward if we have to continue in a more kind of distributed way. So I'll follow up with I'll send an email to the list to start to find a good time for a workshop and see who else wants to be involved.
Yeah, and
I'm mindful that. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and I'm happy to represent Fusion if they're not able to attend, but I'll try and get them into that as well. I think there's a few. I think the people who are most actively using this list at the moment are finding issues with it, but they're having trouble spending time engaging with it. So I'm keen to try and figure out a way that we can engage them and bring them into this conversation, even if it's only they can only spend time for summary thoughts. Yeah.
Okay. I'm also mindful that face-to-face workshop can be difficult for everyone to attend, just for location reasons. So I'll do my best to give plenty of notice so people can schedule in time. But if we have several, that we try and use different locations so that we can get a different mix of people involved. And the intention is to for this to be kind of productive time. It's not to exclude anyone. So we will be doing kind of regular check-ins back on the mailing list, back on the blog, and here on the calls to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to provide some input. Okay. So the other kind of, as I said at the beginning, the other key area is booking. It's quite this as a new area. There's quite a lot of work to be done here. And I think in some ways it's quite different to the standards work that we've done so far, because we've been just focusing on publishing open data in some fairly simple, using some fairly simple mechanisms. But booking from the conversations that we've had so far is much more complex. Not just in terms of the variety of business models and approaches that people are taking to book events at the moment, but also that there's a number of different elements to consider around security, SLAs for APIs, developer support that we've already touched on, but also the fact that we're starting to get into commercial relationships between organizations, which is very different to just publishing open data for anyone to access, use and share. So we kind of want to try and approach this quite methodically. So what we're planning to do to start with is to try and take stock of the existing landscape of booking APIs in the sector. So we can develop a shared understanding of what the current state of play is across different platforms, different applications, and the variety of business models and approaches that are being used so far. And then we can use that as a basis for working out what is the most useful next steps in terms of standardization. I think there's likely to be a different mix of organizations and platforms who are very keen to get involved at this stage, who may not have been involved in some of the early work on OpenActive. So I'm keen to reach out to those people and make sure that we can get them involved. So after Sally and I have done some of this groundwork around discoverability and usability, we'll be moving on to booking. Has anyone got any comments or feedback on that? Or anyone's particularly interested in booking? That's their kind of main motivation, for example?
Yeah, hi, this is Dom from I'm In. Nice to be here. Yeah, I think as some of you are aware, booking is particularly our bag. We're really excited about this. And just picking up on something you said there, Lee, which is it's interesting. So there are a variety of business models in the sector and loads of different security requirements. But if we think back to when this all started, and we were focusing on publishing the open data, it did at that point seem, a difficult objective and something that was like, this can't be done. And now we're like, however many 20 data sets open, and now it's like there's more coming and it's great. So I think we should be looking at this as a really exciting, as I think you're alluding to, a really exciting opportunity. If I could just spend a couple of minutes and explain a little bit about where our logic is coming from with regards to this. And I'm really speaking on behalf of Nish, who's been doing quite a bit of research into this area. He's actually out and about now, continuing that research. And the thing he's finding is that it's difficult to continue pitching the big vision and the great ideal to commercial businesses, which is like, open data is this amazing thing, when they turn around and say, where's the commercial return for me? And I was speaking to an operator yesterday at the UK Active Summit, and within about 20 seconds of explaining the whole thing, the question was, yeah, but what's in it for me? Where's the commercial return? What do I get back? And the way we see this is, whilst open data is obviously all built on open data, and you know as well as anyone that I'm in really advocates open data, and we're open data evangelists, but we think it really centers around booking the next step. And there's kind of maybe sometimes a lack of momentum in terms of, there's unresolved GitHub issues here and there, and some data feeds down. And we need to really build a strong business case for this. We need to get data open and make it bookable, so that importantly, and this is coming in directly from the work Nish is doing, so we can bring on board high profile data consumers that can drive traffic towards these activity providers. I know he's talking to a number of big ones, from sports brands, insurance companies, employee wellness, things like that. And the reasons that the 2 points they have when he's speaking to them, the two questions are, is it bookable, first of all? And does it cover the activities and geographies that my demographic, so the demographic that they are interested in, does it cover those? And the reason that, number one, so booking, the most important one, the reason that this comes up so much is because that Nish is finding that no big brand investing in a digital or web presence wants people leaving their web or app. So they don't want people finding an activity and then being signposted away. Initially, that was good. We could do that with open data. Now we need to kind of drive the booking actually within the experience. And I think secondly, Nish was saying that if booking happens with a brand or with the organization, the big organization with a lot of users using it, then they own the customer. They can learn about them, they can reward them, they can support them, they can incentivize them going forwards, and they can better serve that customer's needs. So I guess kind of picking up on making this a little bit more tangible, some of the examples that he's coming back with are, Lucozade Sport have said they must have booking to prove that 1 million people can be more active. Reward Gateway, who are involved in employee HR and wellness, they must have booking. Vitality, the rewards and insurance company, have also said they must have booking. And importantly, we're now getting tech companies competing for contracts and being asked about open bookability. I know Nish has been speaking to Badminton England recently about this. And his work currently extends to a lot of organizations within OpenActive. So he's reached out to a few who he hoped would make it to the call today. So he's actually got something on their behalf, which I'm now reading on his behalf. So Make Sweat, so Nick from Make Sweat has said, Make Sweat is actively investigating the benefits of an open booking standard, which would allow Make Sweat to offer booking through third-party booking systems and vice versa. As with OpenActive, with the data sets, Make Sweat would look to become the first live booking platform to contribute and benefit from an open booking framework. So there's real emphasis there on wanting to contribute to this in the same way that this group has done so well in doing the activity lists and the standard. And one more, and I apologize, I know I'm speaking quite a lot here on Nish's behalf, so do blame him, not me. But Hula Hub have also said that they're all about sports and leisure activity bookings. Having a common API standard for bookings will allow us to add new activity providers more quickly and easily. From the overall sector's perspective, it will also help widen access and participation, which really echoes the message we're getting back from these big brands, which is, we can help get people more physically active, but we just need to be able to offer this bookability. And then finally, NGBs are also happy to get involved, according to Nish's work, and helping to shape the standards and add influence. Badminton England is really driving this and really at the forefront of wanting this bookability. So yeah, that was a lot for me, but that's basically kind of I guess an overview of the work that I'm in, and particularly Nish out in the field has been doing with regards to bookability, and how important we see this is for the sector in building on something that is just, this whole movement, I don't need to tell you, is amazing. It's done so many great things, and to take it to the next level and engage the right organizations in order to achieve what we all want to achieve, which is a more active nation. We believe that booking is really it's integral to this. It has to happen. And I'd love to hear anybody else's feedback on that, people on the group who believe the same thing.
That's great, Tom.
Yeah, we're obviously also very interested and are allowing people to make bookings for a number of different operators already through My Local Pitch. So know a thing or two about working with APIs to make bookings possible and payments, and about processing the data and the information.
Anyone else want to add any thoughts?
Just in case people haven't seen, Samuel Savage in the chat has been putting some thoughts in there as well.
Yeah, okay.
So that's, can you hear me?
No,
yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Goodness. I was just going to say, should we read that comment out? Sorry, the video won't capture the comments. So if you read.
Yeah, I was just about to. Yeah. Okay. So Samuel was saying documentation is key, and particularly using offshore developers in application development. Booking is all about communication with source, so that data is not one way. That's one of the problems we're having, is the conversation around events coming from open data. Agreed booking would be a big step forward. So I think we're all on the same page. I think everybody agrees that booking is a vital part of the kind of ecosystem that we're building, and it's great to know that there's so much extra momentum that we can unlock by making some progress around booking. So I mean, I hope I didn't give you the impression that booking was in some way a low priority or wasn't going to happen. Because that was my intent. I was just setting out a proposal for how we were going to start to move that new thread of activity forward. Rather than just assuming a blank slate, it seems reasonable to get everybody who has done some work around booking to share what they've learnt so far, what the way that they approach building those APIs, so that we can benefit from that learning and move forward as quickly as we have with the open data. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to say then, I hope it didn't come across as a diatribe there, Lee. I wasn't in any way trying to like cross anything you'd said before. It was really kind of really seizing the opportunity with, you know, a forum, and if you're kind of given a soapbox, one would hope they try and get up there and preach what they want to preach. But I think Imin would love to be a part of that, and I'm sure if Nish was here, he'd be saying he'd be happy to share the kind of data he's getting back and the information and what people want, because ultimately, in the end of the day, I think it's going to be the data consumers that are going to be driving this agenda. So we'd be more than happy to kind of, on his behalf, offer his help. So yeah, again, I think as the chat is illustrating, like people are keen to be involved. So let's just, as you said, get around the table and talk this.
Yeah, let me go back to those slides. Let me just skip over this slide now. So it's November now. We've got a bunch of work that's currently underway. So Sally's focused on the work she's doing. We also have a developer who's going to start building out an API dashboard. He is beyond starting in a week or so. So we expect to make rapid progress with that. So by December, we hope to have the first iteration of that dashboard available. We've hoped to have published some of the findings around discovery, usability, and get some of the documentation out, but also have that booking research underway so that we can start to make progress. I've been thinking about doing the activity list workshop in January, just to make sure that we've given people as much notice as possible to book that in. I'll come back to the aggregator workshop in a minute. But on booking, really, I'm kind of, I suppose the approach I was outlining is I think very similar to what we did at the start with the opportunity data. I asked people to share example data so that we could start to compare across different platforms, and then we start to draw out the common elements. So what I want to do is encourage everybody to do the same thing for booking. So if you've got existing APIs where you're happy to share documentation, if it's not already open, then I think doing that would be useful input into that research. I think sharing the kind of business models and approaches that you're taking around implementing booking will help us start to understand some of those commonalities as well. So this is stuff that's not months and months away. This is stuff that we want to get underway as quickly as possible. But we do want to get some momentum behind the kind of developer relations side of things, because we're aware that the data as it stands is quite in quite a mixed state. We don't yet have all of the publishers implementing the standard data model, and there is some variation around how people have started to implement that. So I think there is merit in having a thread of activity to start to encourage some more convergence there. Does that seem reasonable in terms of timescales?
Yeah, it's good to know that everything's kind of ticking along. So yeah, we'll wait for all the information to come out, and then we will help where we can.
Great. Okay.
Can you hear me again?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry, it's frictionful speaking. Yeah, is it worth sending? So a few people I've spoken to have kind of said, I've got this booking requirement or that booking requirement, or I've got this more general activity finder list question. Specifically for the booking research, and you were just asking about people sending in specs. I can see, sorry to quote you there, Raymond, but for the sake of the audience, for Clarity Live perspective, we're just in the process of creating some REST-based wrappers around some of our booking functionality. He's going to investigate whether he can share those if he's allowed to. And so that sounds great. And I'm sure there's a few other companies, I think probably Booking Bug is one, where they'd be happy to share the existing booking APIs and see if we can get Gladstone to do the same. For those that don't have booking APIs yet, is it worth us, or are you able to create some kind of template or something that I'm just thinking what format would we most like to capture requirements in from the many people that might want to create an API in the future that haven't yet done so?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm not sure I've got an immediate answer. I'm not sure I've got a good answer right now. I think just starting to get a sense of what people are expecting from booking might be useful. We can maybe start to put together a more detailed questionnaire, or, you know, as you say, maybe a template to fill in. But what I was thinking was that if we can understand what commonalities there are between some of the existing APIs, then we might be able to kind of riff off that in terms of debate. So, you know, if we can identify the commonalities, does that work for people? So use that as a provocation rather than just a kind of general blank slate of, you know, what are your requirements? You know, more, would this work for you? The answer, but
so
Lee, one of the other things which we'll also need to sort out quite quickly is we'll need to nail down what the scope of this work is going to be in terms of will it stop at the point of making the booking, or will this also have some parts to it for after booking service notifications or service related activities? I mean, one of the biggest things that we get is after a booking has been made, there is all the normal stuff that you're needing to send email confirmations, whatever the case is. But then more and more people are wanting push notifications 6 hours before the event, so that they have a little reminder on their phone to say that they have this booking or whatever the case is. We'll need to have some sort of guidance in all this as to what happens after the booking has been taken, accepted, and processed in terms of service communications and things like that. So.
You need to pull together some use cases. So I'll take away an action to maybe think about best way to start capturing those from the group. So we can start to get this moving forward. I mean, there's various kind of use case templates that are floating around, but you know, just trying to identify what does bookability mean for everyone, to understand where those kind of limits are, and where we can most usefully focus our initial efforts. Because I think we will need some very clear use cases here to guide the work. Otherwise, we're going to take on quite a lot of such a broad space that we could end up taking on more than we can usefully deliver.
And Raymond's just also said service aspect becomes very relevant if big brands want to own the customer. Just being your voice, friend. I just also on that, would be really interesting to think about how we, I guess, set some pace to this. I'd be interested to know how we basically keep. What would be really great to do is to demonstrate to some of the bigger organisations who want to get involved some kind of roadmap in terms of when they need to engage and what they would need to provide. I don't know if that's easy to do, but I'm just thinking, because if we can do that, it's much easier for them to commit to joining these kind of calls when they can see where the outcome is going to be, or at least where we're going with it by a certain date. I know last time one of the reasons I had an issue just in terms of engaging them to carry on coming back to the call was that we had quite a few calls, and obviously there wasn't, because we didn't have like an overarching kind of, this is when we're aiming to, you know, I guess it was less clear to them when it was going to finish or what the key points to input were. So if we've got timescales around this, it might be really good to say, actually, if you come on these 6 calls or whatever it is, this 2 months of calls, this is going to be where we focus on this aspect that you might be interested in, activity lists, booking, whatever it is. And then like we can really focus on trying to get those people engaged in the conversation. And even if that results in like a second set of conversations, that is another focused period of time, which they can decide whether to commit to or not. At least it's kind of a, you know, almost chapters of push that doesn't kind of go on without a kind of next chapter being defined. It's just a kind of idea.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I certainly want to get to a clearer roadmap and have some target dates for versions of specifications and outputs. I don't think we're in a state where we can start to do that yet, because we need to get the groundwork in place in terms of scoping use cases and understanding the existing work. So I think we're a little way off from getting there, but that's certainly what we need to be aiming for. I'm mindful of time. There's just one or two other things that I don't want to stop anyone from commenting, but there's one or two other things that I just wanted to briefly touch on. We'll share these slides afterwards. It'd be really good to get a wider mix of people attending these meetings, so that we can get some developers and product owners who are starting to build things with the opportunity data, so we can get some feedback on how well, you know, the data is supporting their needs, and as I mentioned already, around kind of broadening input around booking. It would be great for all of you to kind of share out the work that we do here, that we're starting to communicate through the blog to try and raise some of the visibility of it more generally across the program. So there's some links in here that you can, it'd be great if you could share out more widely. In terms of our next calls, this was what I was planning to do between now and Christmas. So in the call in 2 weeks' time, I wanted to take stock of where we're at with the opportunity data. So I started to look at ways we can do some analysis of the data that's published, so we can get a sense of what the quality variation is amongst some of the existing data feeds. That's something that we need to be doing anyway at the ODI as part of some of the the dashboard build out that we are doing. So I wanted to share that with the group. And have a check-in and discussion around in November, later in November, around the activity list, where I think we can firm what we will try to achieve in a workshop, which will probably be in January. Then the call in December, hopefully by that point we will have had some good input from the community, and I'll be putting some calls out on the mailing list and elsewhere to help us start to understand what the landscape looks like around booking, so we can start to focus in on some of those use cases, some of the other things that we haven't really had time to discuss today, around just broader requirements around security, privacy, payment handling, and a whole bunch of issues that are going to be important in that area. So how does that seem okay to everyone? Any thoughts or feedback on that?
Just to jump back quickly for the video reference, Jamie, before he left, he's had to drop off, said he has to drop off. We'll be able to lend My Local Pitch's experience in consuming booking APIs and pain points, in particular payments. Otherwise, haven't had too much trouble in integrating the booking APIs, often more straightforward than availabilities. So just wanted that captured.
Great. Cool. Okay. So any other questions or feedback from the group today?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly bring up one thing about data quality. So it would be fantastic to be able to offer booking through Get Active, for example, but that's only going to be effective if the data is good enough to be useful. I noticed Samuel made a comment on that earlier. What we're finding is that there's a whole range of data. Some of it's useful and some of it doesn't really say much about the session. So we're starting to look at how we can rate data as per its usefulness to an end user. So I wondered whether there would be scope to at some point discuss data quality and also perhaps look at the way fields are used?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's some of the discussion that I wanted to have at the next call, because what I'm looking at is in terms of which fields each provider's using, how they're actually filling them in, so that we can start to tighten up the kind of conformance criteria. Because what we've done so far is really just sort of to remove any blockers to publishing. Have just said, here's a variety of ways in which to associate activities with your events, for example. But we might need to now be more prescriptive to say, okay, to support booking or particular discovery use cases, then you should be doing it like this. So we can start to develop some clearer profiles of the data model. Mm. So if there's things that you've learned already, then it'd be great for you to take a slot in the next call and maybe share that with the group if you're happy.
Lee, I was just going to say, surely that will also fall out of the work around building validators and things like that. Part of the validation exercise could be to actually give you a ballpark rating as to your sample data that you fed into the validator.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the reasons I want to, so we could just build a validator for the model as it stands, but I kind of want to take stock of what the variance is in the data, so that we can focus on the things that we need people to improve. So that might be making sure that things are geolocated, for example, or that there's a core set of fields that would allow booking to be done on the third-party platform. Okay, if there's no other questions or comments, then I think I'm going to wrap up the call for today. Okay, right. So thanks again for everybody attending. Hopefully those of you who attended for the first time have enjoyed it so much that you'll be coming back to the next one. The video is going to go up on YouTube as normal. So hello to those of you who are watching remotely. So that's it for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Lee. Cheers.
Bye.